It was the spring of 1931. The Great Depression had swept across America like a dark storm. Jobs were gone, factories silent, and hunger walked freely through the streets. In the southern states, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, life for the poor was even harsher. But for young black men, it was worse than harsh. It was dangerous. On a slow, rusty freight train heading through Alabama, 9 young African-American boys climbed aboard, chasing hope. They were tired, hungry, and desperate for work. Each carried dreams heavier than their few belongings. They didn't know it yet, but this train would not take them to opportunity. It would carry them straight into the pages of history. The train rattled through the countryside, filled with vagrants, black and white, all riding illegally just to move from one dying town to another. Some white boys picked a fight with the black boys on board. Rocks were thrown, fists flew, the fight was over in minutes. But when the train stopped near a small Alabama town called Scottsboro, the white boys ran to the authorities, angry, humiliated, and seeking revenge. They accused the black boys of raping them. No one asked for evidence, no one asked questions. By the end of the day, 9 black teenagers, some as young as 13 years old, were dragged into jail, beaten, and branded as criminals before a trial even began. Newspapers screamed the headline, "9 Negro boys arrested for rape." The South, already poisoned by racism, exploded with rage. Crowds formed outside the Scottsboro jail demanding lynching. The sheriff moved the boys to a safer location, but safe was a relative word. They didn't know that in the coming days they would face a court not of justice, but of hatred.
Only 12 days after their arrest, the trials began. 12 days, no time for preparation, no real lawyers, no fair defense. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with hostility. Outside, hundreds of white townspeople gathered, cheering for execution. 8 of the 9 were sentenced to death. The youngest, 13-year-old Roy Wright, narrowly escaped the electric chair because of his age. The trials lasted barely 3 days, but their pain would last for decades. News of the injustice reached across the nation. Organizations like the Communist Party USA and the NAACP began to fight for the boys' freedom. They sent lawyers, petitions, and journalists. For the first time, the case of poor black youths in the Deep South became a national issue. Soon, the world began to see the truth. There was no evidence of rape. Medical exams showed no sign of assault. One of the women, Ruby Bates, even recanted her story, admitting she had lied under pressure. But still, the Alabama courts refused to let go. In 1932, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed the case under Powell v. Alabama. For the first time in American history, the court ruled that the defendant's right to counsel had been violated. It was a landmark decision, one that said every person, rich or poor, deserves a fair trial and a proper lawyer. But even after this victory, the boys were not free. Alabama refused to drop the charges. They were retried over and over again. Years passed. Different juries, different judges, the same racism. Some boys, like Haywood Patterson, were tried 4 times. Others were given decades in prison. They grew up behind bars. Teenagers turned into men, watching their youth dissolve inside cold concrete walls. But their case was changing America. It exposed the ugly truth about Southern justice. It forced the country to confront racism in the courts, and it sparked the early flames of the civil rights movement.
Haywood Patterson spent most of his life in prison. He tried to escape and did once, but was captured again. He wrote a book called Scottsboro Boy, describing the horror he lived through. Clarence Norris, one of the oldest, was the last survivor. He was finally pardoned in 1976, 45 years after his arrest. By then, most of the others were gone. Some died in prison. Some disappeared, never fully free. But the mark they left would never fade. The Scottsboro Boys Case changed American law forever. It established the right to counsel. It opened the door for equal jury selection. And it became a symbol that justice could no longer be one color. Decades later, historians would call it one of the most infamous miscarriages of justice in American history. In 2013, the state of Alabama officially pardoned the Scottsboro Boys, posthumously clearing their names. But the real victory was not in the pardon. It was in the awareness that followed. Because those 9 boys showed the world what happens when justice is blinded by prejudice. As we look back today, the sound of that train still echoes, the clanging of wheels, the whispers of injustice, the cries of boys who never stopped saying, "We are innocent." The Scottsboro Boys did not just fight for themselves. They fought for a generation that would come after them, for every person who would one day stand in court and say, "I deserve a fair trial." Their story is not just about history, it's about humanity, about how a lie can destroy lives, and how truth, though slow, can rebuild them.